Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is April 23rd, 2020, and this is part two of my response to an interesting commenter on a video I posted yesterday about Donald Trump putting out an attack ad against Nancy Pelosi. In part one of this response, I watched and responded to a couple of videos that this commenter pointed out as examples of what they were talking about. And you can find that on the channel. This is part two, in which I respond to their comments, which were quite lengthy, directly. So let's get into it. I will say off the bat, I found these comments obnoxious, largely, not entirely, but largely obnoxious. And I really don't know anything. I don't know this commenter. I don't know what their background is. I don't know their age, their experience, whatever. I just don't know anything about them, but these comments came off as just obnoxious to me for reasons that I will explain. So the judge of socialism has logged on was the sense that I got from these comments. So let's just get right into them. Interesting video, but when did Bernie ever call himself a revolutionary? Since when should any Marxist be behind social democracy like Bernie? This is what's scary with American socialists, communists. You believed in electoralism and that someone like Bernie could do anything good if he became president. Bernie's policy isn't even democratic socialism. I mean, already I'm just kind of like so sick of hearing stuff like this. So this person, I don't know where they're from. Like I said, it seems to be somewhere outside the United States. I'm thinking Sweden because they reference Sweden a lot. I don't know that for sure. Sweden obviously not being a socialist country either. So I don't know what leg exactly they have to stand on in criticizing US Marxists in this way. But let's go on and then I'll address these points one by one. But I found this, I did not address these comments one-on-one in the comment section. First of all, there's just too many points. Second of all, it's just kind of irritating. And I thought a video reply would be just a better format to expand this discussion to everyone, because I really feel like people need to stop with these lines of argument. And if they're resulting from a real lack of information, then let's get that cleared up, and the sooner the better. Okay, so Bernie's policy isn't even democratic socialism. Nothing he said was even close to Bernstein's ideas, which were anti-revolutionary. Bernie was never against capitalism as long as companies paid the workers a minimum wage of 15. Making schools and healthcare cheaper. By the way, none of these are socialistic ideas, but these were Bernie's ideas. Again, the name of my channel is Socialism for All. Do you really feel like you need to explain this to me? I guess is the question. Like, these are just such irritating, know-it-all, pedantic points. I guess the question is just... Anyway, well, let's keep going, I guess. Social democracy is a big problem. Just look at Sweden, for example. They are in the hands of social democrats today, but the pharmacies are privatized. A lot of schools have been privatized and so on, maybe not under social democrats. Okay, well, that's kind of key to note at least, though, right? But now that they have the power, nothing has been changed back to what it was. Well, I don't know that much about Sweden particularly. I don't know that much about the particular struggle there. I mean, there's been a general trend of, in the early 20th century, we were still had laissez-faire capitalism for the most part in various forms. I mean, some places were still kind of feudalistic, depending on what country we're talking about. But in the more advanced countries, it was laissez-faire capitalism. And then in the early to mid 20th century, there were socialist revolutions, and then social democracy floated as a compromise. So there were revolutions and reforms because capitalism really wasn't working, particularly after the great crash in 1929. And then there was the neoliberal turn in the late 20th century, late 70s, 80s, 90s, the Soviet Union collapses. There's a period of privatization and deregulation and defunding. And there is somewhat of a turn back towards social democracy. I don't know what's going to come out of that. That struggle is still ongoing, but we see people at least trying to revive the class struggle, which was really harshly defeated. I mean, it was dealt some serious blows, not totally defeated. The ideas are still here. Some of the organizations are still here, but it's a real fight to rebuild them. So I don't know. A lot of this email just sounds like whining to me, but let's go on. I don't get American Marxists, to be honest. For example, Maoists around the world are against what China is today, while Maoists and even Marxist-Leninists in the US are defending China. What the hell? American Marxists are the guys who come late to class and then scream loudest. I mean, you're screaming pretty loud yourself, I think, but I don't know what your familiarity is with the United States. So I hear a lot of criticism. I don't hear a lot of open, honest, open-minded questioning here. There are questions, but they're couched in fairly offensive, inflammatory rhetoric. So, that would just be if you want answers to these questions. I mean, I'm going to answer them in this video to the best of my ability, but this is kind of an irritating approach. Just putting that out there for you. Not even Marxists in the UK are defending someone like Corbyn. They hate that social democrat. Same goes with communists and revolutionaries in Sweden, France, Germany. They are all against people like Bernie. But in America, you guys had some hope for a social democrat, really? He should never have had so much momentum and people behind him ever, if you are a Marxist, so to speak. Well, I'm super sorry that we didn't check with you before making our plans politically, because clearly you have got it all figured out. And I'm sure that in Sweden or wherever you are, you will be leading the revolution next month, right? Now, that's not to say that you can't critique ideas and strategies, but it does sound to me like you don't quite know what you're talking about when it comes to the U.S. I also question some of these statements here, like not even Marxists in the UK are defending someone like Corbyn. Really? Is that just a blanket statement? No Marxists are defending Corbyn? I mean, Marxists in the US are not uniformly behind Bernie Sanders, first of all. Okay? Plenty of Marxists don't want anything to do with them. I personally offered qualified support because I think that in a period where we're trying to rebuild the left, we need to start wherever we can, fight the battles that we can. And frankly, I've been involved in far left organizing in the past. It hasn't been that successful. I'm totally open to trying different strategies to see if different things work. And the fact is, we have a working class today. So people born in 1990 never grew up having the Soviet Union in existence. People born in 1980 really don't remember it. People born in 1970 maybe remember it a little bit, but by the time they were 20 or so, it was over. And even then they didn't see its peak years. And then people older than that were indoctrinated heavily with Cold War propaganda. Pretty much everyone under 50 today in the United States grew up without a labor movement. So there really wasn't much in terms of like left-wing organizations for people that were reaching into people's everyday lives. We were already at the end of history. We are all middle class kind of like point at that time. So people didn't see the struggle. People didn't see how the sausage was made. So people now who are between 20 and like 50 years old, because the baby boomer generation, the me generation, decided to totally turn their back on, not totally, but I mean largely turn their back on the need to engage in socialist efforts and unionist efforts and to defend the Soviet Union and other examples of actually existing socialism. It died. And a lot of that momentum that had been built up in the late 1900s, early 20th century, really all the way up through World War II and then the McCarthyist period in the late 40s, which is when a lot of this got stamped out for good. Following which, 10 years later, the labor union movement peaked in 1960. That was 10 years after McCarthyism, more or less. And then it's been in decline ever since. So, I mean, you can't just come in here with guns blazing, like criticizing the U.S. left for not being up to your particular standards of what you think Marxist struggle is. I invite you to come over to the United States. First of all, try living as a United States worker. Yeah, the U.S. gets a lot of benefits of being imperialist. I mean, you can get cheap, food and other cheap consumer commodities from around the world that are shipped in. But try living without health care. Or try having a $500 to $1,000 payment a month to get a higher education, which is free or very cheap in a lot of other more advanced countries. Try organizing in under those conditions. It's not as easy as it sounds. It's really not. People are terrified. People live paycheck to paycheck. And the people are constantly inundated with heavy propaganda from all angles that is very subtle and sophisticated to keep them believing in personal responsibility and it's all your fault, and there's all this kind of personal shaming at a cultural level. It's very hard to overcome. So when something like a Bernie Sanders comes along and it's a cultural moment that leftists across the left of what is existing now, neoliberal political spectrum, can come together and start having a discussion about, like, how do we get out of this? It's a positive thing. So back to the comments now. Okay, so this whole thing about China, I'm not Chinese. I don't speak Chinese. I don't live in China. I've never been to China. China had a revolution a long time ago, and my job as a Marxist, I don't see as being critiquing China's socialism. I don't see that as my job. I don't see that really as something that's even vaguely appropriate for me to be engaging in. Obviously, my solidarity is with the Chinese working class in whatever they're doing, just as I support the working class across the world in their struggle for socialism. So that's my job. I see a lot of different things about China. And I understand the point that you're making of like Maoists versus Dengists and all that kind of thing. I don't know. I'm not in the Chinese Communist Party. I couldn't tell you. So I'm not an expert, but I can tell you that being in the US, where when you say the word socialism, instantly 5, neckbeards appear out of fucking nowhere and like start berating you for even mentioning the word. There is a tendency as part of the effort to exhume and rehabilitate the corpse of socialism. People now are just starting that process in the last few years as like a mass movement. And we're looking at actually existing examples of socialism. I don't know where the line is between ultra left and real Marxist, Leninist, Maoist on the China question, what they're doing today. I mean, I see problems with what little information I have about China, because you can't even get reliable information for the most part about China in the United States. I mean, it's hard. It's extremely difficult. But I give it the benefit of the doubt. I'm trying to organize where I am, obviously trying to learn from history as well and other current examples of socialism. I can tell you, though, the United States is one of the most backward capitalist countries, advanced capitalist countries you can imagine, and that's where my primary focus is. But just to try to explain that a little bit, I think that there is still a consensus coming out now that more, thousands and thousands of people are becoming more interested in socialism and trying to answer these questions. What do we do next? What are the good examples from history and the present, and what are the bad examples? How do we improve? Like these are ongoing things, and I don't think you can just come in with there already is a correct position on all of these things that everyone has accepted. I really think that that's still in flux at this point in early 2020. As for the rest of it about having hopes for a social democrat, please see the other video in which I respond to the fellow traveler videos, because I spoke at some length to those points. So, this is why we who live in Middle Eastern, European, Asian countries look at American socialists. We mostly feel bad for you. Oh, well, thank you. And even laugh at you guys because it's like you missed the point. Well, sir, first of all, that's super fucking obnoxious. That's not solidarity. That's just you being a dick. That's you being holier than thou. And that's not Marxist. You know, Marxism and the struggle for socialism is not about sitting back and ranking like who is the most socialist on the planet. It's about engaging in struggle, whatever the current level of development is, and trying to advance it as much as possible at any given time. And I feel like shit like this is just, especially in countries that aren't socialist. I feel like if you were in a country that was socialist, would you be having these attitudes? Because what I see from sincere socialists, and yeah, I guess I am implying this sounds very armchair, this sounds very not sincere to me, is support and supportive things like, some understanding of the difficulty that socialists in the U.S. face. And if you'd like to get a sense of this, if you're not that familiar with U.S. history, because the U.S. has one of the most vicious capitalist classes on the planet. Companies tend to be way larger in the United States than they are in Europe. The United States also grew out of colonies, and it grew out of basically just like profit ventures that were later like retrofitted into having some kind of a national identity. But really, we've always had those remnants here of like the United States is more of a business than it is a country. And that's definitely how the ruling class sees it. It was founded out of a bourgeois revolution. It does not have a history of nobility or like a strong national or ethnic identity. It's a very multicultural society in many different ways. It's geographically huge. It's built on Native American genocide. I mean, just go down the list. This is a country that is built out of violence and capitalism, mercantilism, like colonialism. It's a bloody, bloody country through and through. And I know that there have been a lot of wars in Europe over the centuries. The United States is a little bit unique in that it's this brand new fictional invention, really invented by the colonial powers of Europe, and then inherited and taken over and worked on some more by later generation capitalists into what it is today. And it's a mess. I don't know if you've noticed, but there was a civil war a little over 150 years ago over slavery and over other questions of trying to get the southern states to not be so backward in many different ways. So, I mean, that's a huge part of the struggle. If you look at maps of social indicators like literacy, or whether or not it's legal to hit children in school. The South, the old Confederacy, is still like, it's like another country. It's like another country with a different system almost. So even though the North won the Civil War and managed to pull the South up to those standards and not have them sink backwards further into history, which a lot of the European reactionary capitalists wanted at the time, were backing the Confederacy. But, this is a country, the United States, that is a young country. It's a country of violence. It's a country that was based on capitalism that almost can't see itself any other way. So trying to organize here is so difficult for a lot of different reasons. I know because I've been doing it. It's fucking hard. So when somebody like a Bernie Sanders comes along and says, let's have a discussion about improving conditions, fuck yeah. Marxism, if you go back to like Marx and Engels and even the Communist Manifesto, like the immediate demands, the platform, you do as much as you possibly can at the time. And the United States is pretty fucking backwards right now. Like Trump suspended EPA enforcement during the pandemic. That's the Environmental Protection Agency. So right now, companies don't have federal oversight for pollution right now. That's where we're at. The minimum wage is a joke. It's not even close to paying you enough to live on. Not even close. And we don't have national health care, and we don't have public school past 12th grade. I mean, there are state colleges, but you still have to pay for them, like kind of a lot in a lot of cases. So this kind of thing rubs me really the wrong way, of somebody who maybe, coming from somebody who maybe doesn't understand the U.S. If you want to get a better sense of this, read Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. Not a perfect book, but it was an effort to rewrite like a U.S. history textbook from a socialist perspective. And it's pretty good as a starting point. I mean, obviously you can take any particular event that Zinn lists and then go look up specialty books on whatever, incident or topic that he raises, but it's a good overview. This is a fucked up country. Anyway, I wish we could be further along. I wish we could. This is like a Nazi country, though. I mean, the U.S. led the Cold War against the USSR. It led the anti-communist war in Vietnam and in North Korea. It's a country with a vicious hatred of socialism, and well-armed right-wingers who want to let you know about it. I mean, you can drive around, you see, there's a good group on Facebook, Douche Trucks. If you want to see some of the right-wingers in the U.S. and just how much they flaunt it, this is a difficult country to organize in. I wish we could have done more. I wish the capitalist class wasn't so vicious in the United States. We've had two Red Scares, one in the late teens, 19 teens, and then again in the 1940s. And it was vicious repression. In the first one, they were on the East Coast just rounding up people who looked like they were Italian and Eastern European immigrants and just putting them on boats back to Europe. No questions asked. That's how much they would crack down on the labor movement. I mean, what Trump is doing now, it's pretty consistent with how vicious the capitalist class is towards labor. All right, so let's go on with the comments now. We're on the second panel. I did watch the whole video. I like it, and I agree with you. But when you listen to Marxist, Leninist, and Revolutionary Socialist podcasts such as Revolutionary Left Radio, which are Marxist Leninists, they were behind Bernie before he endorsed Biden. This is what I don't get. That Marxist Leninists, Maoists, Revolutionary Socialists in America was behind Bernie until he endorsed Biden. Why? Why even give him any mention? Well, hopefully from the answers I've given so far, because there's nothing else. Yes, there's PSL. There's the Party for Socialism and Liberation. There's the Workers' World Party. There is the fairly recent PC USA, Party of Communists USA. There's also the Communist Party of the USA. These organizations exist technically and probably have some kind of presence in particular cities, but there are many states where they have no presence at all. I mean, keep in mind, geographically, the United States, you have states like Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota. It's just like a lot of empty space for the most part. And these are places where people still really believe it's 1776 and we have an agrarian economy. And like they don't see the kind of social integration that has occurred because of global capitalism. They don't understand. They don't have the social awareness. They don't have the class consciousness. They don't have the social consciousness. They really see it as like my land, my effort. Like it's just the mentality that they're using to analyze their political situation and their social standing is like 200 years out of date for the people who are living in cities or more suburban areas. It's real super hard to even talk to these people, let alone try to like organize them. And that's another running problem in the US left is there is such like a large petty bourgeoisie that frequently is able to muster the power to crush workers' movements. Even though, 100 years ago, I think it was the case that 90% of people were not wage workers, and then 10% were. And then by 100 years later, that flipped to where it was 90% of people now are wage workers and 10% are petty bourgeois or bourgeois. But yet that's not pervasive throughout the country. The consciousness of that is not pervasive. And we're talking about a place where you would get lynched for being even vaguely suspected of being a socialist in some of these southern states. So, I mean, anyway, I feel like these kind of comments just come off as like so tone deaf and so ignorant of U.S. history. Why do we rally around Bernie Sanders? Because there's fucking nothing else. Yes, like I said, there are left groups on paper, and I recommend people to join them because especially if you're in a city, you might be able to get something going in your state, and you should try to do that. But it really helps when these things become mass movements. And for Bernie to dust off the word socialism and start using it, even if he's not using it in the way we would like, it still opens an opportunity for us to extend that discussion further. And that's exactly what people have been doing. It's what I'm doing at Socialism for All. And I've been able to talk to people who are getting tired of liberalism but don't know what to do next. So it's working. And it's not like we were on the verge of a revolution before this. We absolutely weren't. If anything, I think it has dramatically raised class consciousness, and that's why I offered it my qualified support. I think Bernie has fucked us over now, but that's a separate issue. So back to the comments. Why even talk about Bernie? Excuse me. Why even talk about Bernie in a positive way? This is what I don't get with American revolutionary socialists. I don't live in the U.S., so that is why I ask. It is not a got you question or troll. I legit wonder why Marxists were even behind Bernie from the beginning. He wasn't revolutionary. Lenin wrote about people like Bernie. Even Mao did. So why did Marxists in the USA talk good about him? Well, so I think I've answered most of that by now. I read that Howard Zinn book. If your English is good enough to like read a whole high level book like that, read it. I think it will clue you in as to some of the reasons for this. As far as Lenin, I mean, we've just never had a moment like that in the United States. And having a revolution is not a matter of wishing hard enough or writing the right words. There's no magical combination. It's a combination of class conscious workers and the right leadership and the right conditions. And, there have been moments in time like the Seattle general strike in the teens where, you had an interesting situation going on for a while, or even Occupy Wall Street was like a spontaneous mass protest that snowballed and was just drawing, thousands and thousands of people towards it. But, it didn't have the right leadership. And again, you've got to also understand the amount of hope that you're someday going to be middle class that has been sold to the American public. Now, we can try to attack that and offer alternatives to that line of thinking, but it's there. You have to deal with it. And, it requires a fair amount of, trying to be clever and strategize around it, because that is just the landscape that you're dealing with as an organizer. So I do appreciate you saying it's not a got you or troll, but honestly, look back at some of your comments there. I mean, they're offensive. So anyway, I know that the U.S. is a perpetrator of global harm. I hate living in it. I don't like that I am being milked to support it through tax money, through my surplus value that I generate. I don't like it. But the United States is 50 little countries that are kind of similar to each other, stacked together. It's hard to move out of the United States. It really is. And even then it doesn't change the fact that the United States keeps existing. So I guess my point is it sucks to live in the United States more than you might be aware. And if you're living in some kind of a social democracy, you probably have a lot of rights that you take for granted that workers in the U.S. would like give their left foot for, that they'll never probably see now that Bernie is gone. And how do you organize people who are that totally dispossessed in a country as massive as this? In this day and age, it's hard. I mean, we're doing what we can, but anyway, I just feel like this kind of criticism is like super misguided, but on we go. Okay, so the commenter also recommends that I check out the Fellow Traveler videos, and I did do a full response to that. Also, Revolutionary Left Radio, Hakeem, and others. So, yeah, I mean, I am no longer supporting Bernie because I think the Bernie thing has become a trap, and I do think that we need to, as socialists, educate people that they need to let go of Bernie and move on. Okay, so this is actually another key point. I got like a little wrapped up in just being like pissed off because keep in mind, I've been doing what I can to organize people for about 15 years, and it's super frustrating. It's super frustrating. Just you can organize like hell and just watch nothing come of it year after year after year. So then to see this kind of criticism for like, oh, you're not Marxist enough. It's like, fuck off. Seriously. So I get that, you know, some of this is just coming from ignorance, but like just tone it down. Anyway, but the thing about Bernie versus the rest of the Democratic Party, there's kind of a lot here. There's at least two major points I'm thinking of off the top of my head. So one of them is Bernie not taking corporate money. The other one is Bernie's reported pact with the Democratic Party not to organize a third party. So let me get into both of those points right now. So the first point, Bernie not taking corporate money, this to me is the key. This is another thing you might not be aware of if you don't live in the U.S., that U.S. Elections are completely bought. It's not just that it's a bourgeois government and, you know, it self-selects for bourgeois interested politicians. It's completely bought. There was a study by Princeton University that showed that there is zero statistical correlation between public opinion and public policy. In other words, what the working class wants is not reflected any more than at random in actual governmental public policy. What there is a strong correlation between is political donor opinion and public policy. So whereas in the past, when the U.S. elections had more regulations on them, there were at least some kind of counterpowers. I mean, the bourgeois class was always in power. The 1% was always in power in the United States. But there were times in the past, like the 40s, 50s, the 30s maybe, where, and the 60s, really prior to neoliberalism, when the labor movement and other working class community institutions did form some kind of a counterpower where they couldn't totally outweigh the ruling class, but they could at least effectively change some of the trajectory of the United States policy. That is no longer the case at all. Money is considered free speech legally, and so the elections are just literally bought. I believe it was the same Princeton study that said in 95% of U.S. elections, the candidate who spends the most money wins. That means effectively that 95% of the time, it's like an auction. Whoever bids the highest price wins. And then 5% of the time, there's some fluke. And the person who spends less money wins. Trump is an example. Although Trump did get a lot of free media airtime, they would just air his rallies unedited, not fact-checked on television for just hours. So there's that. But that's how bad it is. I mean, that's the effect of money in politics. Then beyond that, we don't have a parliamentary system. So this may be some source of your confusion. If you're in a country with proportional representation, you could back a socialist party that might get 10 seats in the parliament or something. I mean, and there are still problems with that system where, as I understand it, even when there's like a left coalition, like the Liberal party winds up kind of dominating anyway. Whoever has like the majority winds up dominating anyway. It is capitalism after all. But in the United States, it's a winner-take-all system. That means everything is Democrats or Republicans. And in the 80s, the Democrats almost totally cut their ties with labor unions and grassroots anything, and they started turning to corporate money. This was part of neoliberalism. So that's the system. I mean, there is a Green Party, which is not even explicitly socialist. There's a Libertarian Party, which is worse than the Republicans in terms of like capitalism. There's the Constitution Party, which is even more reactionary than the Libertarians. And then, you know, there are some other left parties, Workers' World, Peace and Freedom, which is what the PSL runs. Although they put up Roseanne Barr, I think, in 2012. So I'm not sure what's going on there exactly. But you'll see some Greens and some Libertarians. And there are also a few like state or regional parties. I think in like some of the northern states, Vermont, Minnesota, there will be a progressive party, but it's like just that state. And I'm not sure about Minnesota, one of those, Wisconsin or one of those. So you'll see like a local party that's not Democrat or Republican, maybe, but nothing national. So the entire government is dominated by two political parties, both of which are blanketed in unlimited 1% money. And elections are bought and public policy is bought. Bernie started this thing of not taking corporate money and doing really well anyway. This to me is key, and another reason why, whether or not it works long term, supporting Bernie versus supporting, say, Joe Biden or whatever, it's not even just about the policies, but why could a socialist support Bernie Sanders at all? Because he doesn't take the corporate money. Now, there are other problems when you work with people who do take corporate money and you have to compromise with them. You're just compromising with that money in the end. We see that with people like AOC, who really, I don't support AOC at all, really. I supported Bernie Sanders because it was such a conversation-changing campaign. I really don't see that with AOC whatsoever. So you're probably not going to see AOC videos from Socialism for All at any point. But so the not taking money thing, that is key. It's not even just about will Joe Biden give us Medicare for all. First of all, he said no, he's going to veto it on recent television interview. But it's about the corporate money. So then the second thing, Bernie Sanders, there was a story from Counterpunch around the time of the last election in 2016 that basically the only reason Bernie Sanders was allowed to stay in politics as an independent, not strongly, sincerely challenged by the Democratic Party, was that he made a secret deal with them not to start a third party, not to start a socialist party and then challenge the Democrats. And that if he would just not do that, but remain a lone wolf, they would consider him not a threat and not run anyone against him. So that's kind of like how Bernie became like a, 1 foot in the Democratic Party and 1 foot out. He's sort of a half Democrat in that sense. There's a lot of strings attached between the Democratic Party and Bernie. Otherwise, Bernie wouldn't have made it so far. But this is how fucked up the system is. And Bernie's run was worth supporting for the fact that it exposed some of this stuff. So anyway, I think I've beaten that to death. On to the next panel. Okay, in response to doing this video reply, quote, "You can do that if you want to. I like watching, listening to you and other American revolutionaries to try to understand why you guys think and do things weird compared to the rest of the world." Again, little heavy on the judgment there. You should really ease off of that. For example, 100 years ago, social democrats in Sweden took over power. Under that time, revolution was a thing that was very close to happening. But social democrats gave the people enough, so they forgot about revolutions. This is when a welfare state became a thing. Swedes got cheap healthcare and education. None of them are socialistic. They had food and roofs over their heads, so they calmed down and the idea of socialism vanished. Since then, conservative parties have won in Sweden a couple of times, and they privatized a lot of things, such as pharmacy, lots of schools, and so on. Social democrats have power today, but they did not change it back. Labor aristocracy is what happened. Those who control the union in Sweden are rich. Same goes with social democratic politicians in Sweden. This is what would happen if Bernie would be the president in your country. So we outside of the US are very happy that he gave up. So that's not cool. I mean, again, come to the US, see how poor people in the US live. It's not good. It's not fun. It's not comfortable. Kids growing up in poverty are at risk of so many kinds of harm. It's unbelievable. 500,000 people are homeless in the US. Even people who, and lots of people who are homeless work. Like they work and then they live in a tent in the woods. That's the system that we've got here. It's not good. It's not fun. No one is happy that Bernie Sanders gave up in the US, to my knowledge. Let me know in the comments if you feel differently. But if we had a chance at getting health care to people, like, I don't think we're close to a revolution. I don't think we are. I think, honestly, people who think that are really wrong. We need benefits, though, and we need them now. And we need to have a lot more discussion convincing a lot more working people why socialism is important. We barely have a labor movement. A majority of U.S. workers said that they would join labor unions if there was one in their workplace. Yet only 7 or 8% of the private sector is unionized. Why is that? Labor law. It's almost impossible to form a union. So Bernie was going to change some of that. How do you have a socialist revolution without a labor movement? Is that a thing you can do? I don't know. But it's like the working class is so disorganized right now. I don't know how any of this is going to happen. And personally, I saw Bernie Sanders as bringing people together where more of these conversations were happening. I also really question when you're saying that you outside the U.S., that you really speak for a lot of people outside the U.S. that are happy that Bernie Sanders gave up. I'd really like to hear you justify that, because I don't know how you can be a Marxist and care about workers' rights and say something like the fight for national health care is something you should give up on, or that looking at the actual landscape of the U.S., that there's some other way to pursue it right now. I just don't think there is. I think there are some people willing to investigate other avenues. I do not at this point think it's nearly enough. We're trying to change that. We're trying to build up the socialist movement. But guess what? Kids are being born in poverty today. Kids need healthcare today. Kids need education today. Kids are drinking lead poisoned water in Flint and Newark and other major U.S. cities today. And we need to do something about that. And the Republicans, sure as shit, aren't going to do anything. And the Democrats aren't going to do anything, because both of them are owned by the 1% that doesn't want to do anything about any of this. Literally the only person convincingly, because he didn't take that money, talking about any of this was Bernie Sanders. There's no one else, okay? Like it or not, there's no one else. I don't like it because Bernie just fucked us over by, all he had to do, in my opinion, as I said in the other video, was stay in the race. Let us do the rest of the arguing. Let the fucking coronavirus do the arguing. I mean, this thing is making a case for everything we were talking about, of just getting the U.S. back into a position where workers aren't just dropping like flies, whether it's economic or health related or whatever. Like, we need that. And he fucking bailed on us. And I don't think that's his being a social democrat that is why he bailed. I don't think so. So anyway, this idea that like, oh, now it can pave the path for the purer way, I think that's grossly out of touch with what's actually going on in the U.S. And I say that as somebody who has been trying to organize for a while and getting absolutely nowhere. You know, let me tell you what happens when you hold meetings of socialist organizations in like a U.S. medium-sized city or small city. You get the same 15 people showing up to everything, and like that's it, and trying to engage the working class as a whole. Super tough. Part of American culture is really looking up to the presidency and other leaders. We do need something like that. We you know, people love celebrity culture in this country. That's not going to change. And we need things that will trend like that on Twitter. And unfortunately, that's just the environment that we're working in right now. I mean, we need the other things too. We need a labor movement. We need tenants unions. We need all that stuff. And we're doing what we can through social media to try to organize those things. But people feel terrified. And the people who would benefit most from getting involved are often the ones most terrified of getting involved. So I think this is so incredibly misguided. I could speak for hours about how misguided that is. So Swedish, Germany, oh, sorry, I missed a line. Another thing that's interesting between the US and the rest of the world is that MLs and MLMs of the world are against today's China. Swedish, Germany, France, Norwegian Marxist-Leninists that I have had contact with are against today's China, while Marxist-Leninists and Marxist-Leninist Maoists in the US are defending China and calling it socialism. It's like the ideas of revolution and socialism is a new concept for Americans, so they defend all weird kind of stuff. You know, I don't know you, and I don't know what you do. I would say get off the fucking internet, because there's a world out there of working class people who are suffering terribly, and they don't care about debates between Marxist-Leninist Maoists about China. They don't give. It's like I can't express how little anyone cares about that. No one fucking cares. You know what people care about? People care about, can I be part of something that is going to improve my life? Political parties and social movements attract people because they let people express themselves, they promise them some material gains, and then they keep people in the movement by delivering on those promises. That is what we need, not fucking circle jerk debates about how pure is China. Fucking, that is so not the question right now. It's amazing to me. You know what is the question? Things like Bernie Sanders is talking about. Workplace democracy, healthcare, education, housing. Those are real fucking problems that keep people up at night. That is what we as socialists need to be addressing. And if Bernie Sanders is able to reach people that we're not able to reach on those issues, we need to look at what he's doing and learn from that. That's what I'm trying to do on this channel, is take up those issues that clearly resonate with the working class, clearly resonate. These are things people need. We need those improvements in material conditions. People need control over work. They need control over their schedule. They need better education for their kids. They need clean food, air, and drinking water. They need stable housing. What are we doing for them? And, you know, for a lot of different reasons, brutal repression, negligence of the baby boomer generation, neoliberalism, the Koch brothers and the elections, neo-Nazi groups, whatever it is, there's a lot of factors preventing us from organizing. We're trying to do that. I'm trying to talk to the Bernie Sanders people. And this kind of shit of people sitting on the sidelines just heckling, that fucking helps absolutely no one. Maybe it'll help you win your fucking Reddit debate that no one ever will ever care about. But it does not help a single working person. That's all I have to say about that. Thanks for listening. You can follow us at facebook.com/socialismforall. Support us on Patreon at patreon.com/socialismforall for as little as $1 a month or as much as $100 a month, whatever you can afford or see fit to do. Thanks to our current patrons. Your support is much appreciated. I don't live off of this, but anything you throw my way is hugely appreciated. And, I spend a huge amount of time doing this, which is important. It needs to be done. But, obviously I can't do paid work while I'm doing it. Anyway, take care. Thank you for listening.